It is June 22nd, 1941. A Soviet airfield, somewhere along the western border. Aircraft parked wing to wing as if for inspection. In the first 6 hours of that morning, the Soviet Air Force loses more than 1,200 of them. Most before a single engine turns over, most without a crew member ever reaching the cockpit. 3 years, 10 months, and 10 days later, a Soviet general sits in the ruins of Berlin and accepts the city's surrender. This is not a story about an army that won. It is a story about an army that nearly ceased to exist, and what it cost to make it into what you just saw. At 3:15 in the morning on June 22, 1941, 3.5 million German and Axis troops crossed the Soviet border along a front nearly 2,000 miles wide. 3 Wehrmacht army groups, north, center, and south, drive east simultaneously. General Heinz Guderian's armor strikes northeast toward Smolensk. Stuka dive bombers go in ahead of the armor. Soviet border posts are overrun before their occupants can dress. This becomes the largest military offensive in human history. Nearly 10 million combatants engaged in the opening phase alone, more than 8 million casualties before December. The scale is vast enough to resist any single measurement, but the number that matters most in those first hours is 1,200. 1,200 Soviet aircraft destroyed on the ground, having never left the earth. The Germans expect a campaign of weeks. Their intelligence has told them to. They have watched France collapse in 6 weeks, Poland in 1 month, and concluded that the Red Army is essentially France with worse roads. So what their intelligence cannot account for is how many reserves the Soviet Union can summon from its depths. The Germans estimate perhaps 50 fresh divisions beyond the initial defensive forces. The Soviets will produce more than 200 by August. The mathematics of that miscalculation will take years to execute, but the reckoning is not yet visible in the smoke of the opening morning. What is visible is collapse. And beneath the collapse lies the documentary's founding irony. Because the Red Army did not simply fail to build a capable fighting force, it built one. By 1936, it had formally adopted one of the most sophisticated offensive doctrines in the world: deep battle. Massed armor, artillery, and air power striking simultaneously across the full depth of an enemy front. Disorienting the enemy, encircling it, destroying it before it could reconstitute. The men who created this doctrine had names: Tukhachevsky, Triandafilov, Uborevich. Stalin had them shot in 1937 and 1938. Their doctrine was archived. Their ideas, the same ideas that would eventually destroy the Wehrmacht, were locked in a filing cabinet in the summer of 1941, while the army those ideas were meant to guide bled to death along the western border. The officers who remained were too frightened to show initiative. The ones who tried were shot for it. Into this institutional void, 3 army groups drove east. The encirclements come quickly. At Bialystok and Minsk in the first weeks, entire Soviet armies are surrounded and destroyed. In September at Kiev, 4 complete Soviet armies, the 5th, 37th, 26th, and 21st, are trapped in the largest single encirclement in the history of warfare. Nearly 700,000 Soviet prisoners taken in one operation. By December, the Red Army has suffered 4 million casualties. 3 million of those men are starving in German prison camps. The command structure collapses alongside the front. General Dmitry Pavlov, commanding the Western Front, is arrested 4 days after the invasion begins, shot for cowardice, along with his chief of staff. The message reaches every officer in the Red Army without ambiguity. Retreat meant execution. Secret police units are stationed behind the front lines to catch men moving backward without orders. The result is not courage. It is paralysis, followed by death. And there is one more thing: the T-34 tank, already superior to anything the Germans have fielded, and with sloped armor effectively doubling its protection, its 76mm gun capable of killing anything it faces. is present in June 1941. Fewer than 1,000 of them. Most are destroyed in the first weeks, half-trained crews thrown into piecemeal actions with no coordinated support and no doctrine to guide them. The best tank in the world, squandered in detail. Capability existed. The institutional structure to use it did not. By December, German forward units can see the spires of the Kremlin. The temperature sits below -30 degrees Celsius. German soldiers are tying straw around their boots. Their tank engines will not start without hours of warming. Their artillery shells must be heated before they will fire. Yuri Zhukov commands the defense of Moscow. Born to a peasant family in Kaluga province, conscripted into the Imperial Russian Army as a young man, twice decorated with the Cross of St. George for valor. By the summer of 1939, he had already used tanks and aircraft in coordinated deep battle maneuver to annihilate a Japanese force at Khalkhin Gol on the Mongolian border. A preview at smaller scale of what he would do across the next 6 years. His official evaluation, written before the war by Rokossovsky, reads, "Absolutely cannot be used in staff or teaching jobs because constitutionally he hates them." It is not a criticism, it is a description of what Zhukov is, a man built for exactly this moment. What the Germans do not know, as their forward units scan the Moscow skyline, is what has been held in reserve through the entire catastrophic summer, when Stalin kept the Far Eastern Army intact, refusing to strip it for Moscow's defense, even as the front burned. He had a reason. His intelligence network, built around a spy named Richard Sorge, operating in Tokyo, had confirmed that Japan would strike south into the Pacific, not north, against the Soviet Far East. If Sorge was wrong, the Far Eastern Army vanishing into Japan's advance would leave the eastern border undefended. Sorge was right. On December 5th, 1941, 17 fresh Siberian divisions attack out of the Moscow line. Men in snow camouflage the Germans have never encountered, in temperatures that have paralyzed German equipment. The Wehrmacht is driven back, not destroyed. Driven back. The chance for a quick victory is gone. The war Germany will now fight. A long war. The war of attrition across a continent is the one war it cannot win. While the armies bled, something else was happening. Between July and November of 1941, more than 1,500 Soviet factories were dismantled, loaded onto flat cars, and moved east. Workers rode on top of the machinery through early Russian snow. When the trains arrived beyond the Ural Mountains, the workers bolted machines to frozen ground and began producing before factory walls were raised around them. Germany produced approximately 8,000 tanks in 1942. The Soviet Union, running factories in shifts around the clock in the Urals, produced over 24,000. The T-34 that had existed in hundreds would be built in the tens of thousands. The United States sent 400,000 trucks, far superior to Soviet-built transport. And without them, as Zhukov would later write in his memoirs, the deep offensive operations of 1943 to 1945 would have been logistically impossible. The factories saved the country before the doctrine was ready. The doctrine would take longer. The city of Stalingrad sits on the western bank of the Volga River. In the late summer of 1942, the German 6th Army reaches it. What follows is not a battle in any conventional sense. The Germans call it Rattenkrieg, the Rats' War. Squads of 8 to 10 men fight for every room of every building, every yard of rubble. A German corporal writes home to his father in October. Everyone in Stalingrad who still possesses a head and hands, women as well as men, carries on fighting. The commander of the Soviet 62nd Army holding the city is Vasily Chuikov. Compact, physically forceful, a gold-capped front tooth, and a temper that operates without warning. His army is backed against the river. At the narrowest point of his perimeter, headquarters sits within artillery range of both banks, the German bank and his own. There is nowhere to go. He develops a tactic in response. Hug the Germans. Keep his men within grenade range at all times, so close that Luftwaffe air support cannot be called in without hitting German troops as well. At terrible cost, it holds. Chuikov holds the last ground. What Chuikov does not know is what is being planned several hundred miles away, in the quiet rooms of Stavka. Alexander Vasilevsky has been studying the 6th Army's position for weeks. The flanks of Paulus's army, holding the city, are not held by German divisions. They are held by Romanian, Italian, and Hungarian forces, allies with lighter equipment, lower morale, and no strategic reserve behind them. Vasilevsky's plan, Operation Uranus, is a double encirclement. Strike the Romanian flank to the north, strike the weaker forces to the south, link up behind the 6th Army, trap it against the city it is trying to capture. 2 armies fighting simultaneously, one in the rubble for every room, one in a quiet room for the whole map. At 7:30 in the morning on November 19, 1942, Soviet artillery opens on the Romanian-held northern flank. The barrage is so intense that observers report the ground moving as a single continuous surface. Within days, 2 Soviet pincers are driving toward each other. On November 22nd, they link at the town of Kalak. Approximately 290,000 Axis personnel are encircled east of the Don River. Friedrich Paulus, commanding the 6th Army, receives the reports. His own commanders are unanimous. Break out now, westward, while there is still fuel and ammunition to do it. Hitler agrees, then reverses, under the assurance of Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring that the Luftwaffe can supply the encircled army by air. Göring tells Hitler his planes can deliver 700 tons per day. The Luftwaffe, at maximum effort, delivers 100. Every day without a breakout is a day the window narrows. Every day is men eating their horses, then eating nothing. In mid-December, Field Marshal Erich von Manstein drives a relief column east toward the pocket. It closes to within 50 kilometers of Stalingrad. 50 kilometers, the length of a morning's drive, before stalling. Hitler refuses to allow Paulus to fight westward to meet it, so the column cannot break through the encirclement alone. On December 24th, it begins to withdraw. From that moment, the end is arithmetic. January, temperatures make weapons unreliable. Frostbite cases accumulate faster than medicine can treat them. On January 30th, 1943, the 10th anniversary of the Nazi Party's assumption of power, Hitler does not broadcast his traditional radio address to the nation. What he does that same day is promote Friedrich Paulus to Field Marshal. No German Field Marshal has ever surrendered. The implication is plain. The following day, Paulus surrenders anyway. On February 2nd, the last 91,000 men, all that remains of the 6th and 4th Panzer armies, lay down their weapons in the frozen rubble of Stalingrad. Of those 91,000, perhaps 5,000 to 6,000 will ever return to their homelands. The last of them, more than a decade after the war ended. The 6th Army surrendered on February 2nd, 1943. It was the last time a German force of that scale would encircle a Soviet army. From here, the encirclements would run the other way. The Red Army that closed the trap at Kalak was not the Red Army of 1941. In the war's early months, the army had been forced to scale back its armored formations to the tank brigade, the largest unit inexperienced commanders could reliably handle. It was an admission of institutional failure, made honestly and urgently. Over 2 years of catastrophic battle, a new generation of officers had emerged. Men who learned operational command the only way available to them, by doing it wrong, surviving, and doing it again. Or what they were relearning, without knowing they were relearning it. because the men who first wrote it down were dead and their papers were sealed, was deep battle. The doctrine of Tukhachevsky and Triandafilov, executed now from necessity and hard-won experience. Artillery blasts a gap in the German line. Tanks pour through, bypassing strong points, not stopping to reduce them. Mobile infantry races ahead, cutting supply lines, overrunning headquarters. The enemy finds its front, its rear, and its flanks simultaneously under attack. Disoriented, unable to reinforce, unable to retreat in order. The men who designed this were shot in 1937. The men who rebuilt it paid for that loss in blood that cannot be calculated. Kursk, July 1943. The German army, preparing what it hopes will be its last major offensive in the east, aims at a Soviet salient nearly 200 miles deep and 150 miles wide. The plan? Cut off and destroy the Soviet forces inside it, restore the initiative, prove the Wehrmacht still capable of strategic offense. There is one factor the German High Command cannot fully account for. The Soviets know it is coming. Through the Lucy spy network operating out of Switzerland, Stavka receives detailed German operational plans, weeks in advance. For the first time in the war, the Red Army prepares a defense knowing exactly where, when, and in what strength the blow will fall. 2,400 anti-tank mines per kilometer of front. 8 successive defensive belts extending 200 kilometers behind the line. They wait. The German offensive begins on July 5th. It stalls almost immediately, driving into a killing field of unprecedented density, its mobile reserves consumed in the attempt to breach defenses designed for precisely that attempt. When the German armor is worn and committed, the Soviet counter-offensive, Operation Kutuzov, strikes. After Kursk, Germany never again conducts a large-scale strategic offensive on the Eastern Front. The initiative has passed. It will not pass back. June 23, 1944. One day after the 3rd anniversary of Barbarossa. The Soviet offensive that will end the war in the East begins on the same calendar date as the German invasion that started it. Operation Bagration targets Army Group Center, the same force that drove to the Moscow suburbs in December 1941. 2.5 million Soviet troops, 5,200 tanks, 36,000 artillery pieces. To the Maskirovka, the deception operations, has been so comprehensive that German reserves are positioned hundreds of miles from the actual attack. 28 German divisions are annihilated. Casualties exceed 350,000 in 2 months. A worse defeat, proportionally, than Stalingrad. The Red Army covers 300 miles in 3 weeks. The world's attention is fixed on Normandy, where the Western Allies landed 17 days before. In 2 months of summer fighting, Army Group Center effectively ceases to exist. April 1st, 1945. The Kremlin. Stalin summons 2 of his commanders, Marshal Georgy Zhukov, commanding the 1st Belarusian Front, and Marshal Ivan Konev, commanding the 1st Ukrainian Front. He asks them both, directly, who will take Berlin. The rivalry between the 2 men is documented, so sometimes bitter, and Stalin knows it. He's not asking a question. He's setting a competition because ambition is a more reliable accelerant than orders. Both men leave Moscow knowing what the other wants. The force assembled for Berlin, 2.5 million Soviet soldiers, 6,250 tanks, 7,500 aircraft, 41,600 artillery pieces. The 1st Belarusian Front alone has stockpiled 7 million rounds of artillery ammunition. Facing them, the German 9th Army, 14 understrength divisions, 512 armored vehicles. At 5 o'clock in the morning on April 16, 1945, the guns of the 1st Belarusian Front open. The bombardment is the heaviest concentration of artillery in the history of warfare. And then Zhukov activates the plan's most distinctive feature: 140 powerful searchlights positioned to blind the German defenders and illuminate the battlefield for the advancing Soviet troops. The smoke and debris thrown up by the barrage catches the searchlight beams and reflects them back. The Soviet troops moving forward are illuminated. They become targets. The searchlights do not blind the Germans. They blind the attackers. There is a second problem. The German defenders, anticipating the bombardment almost exactly, had pulled back from their front-line positions minutes before the guns opened. The barrage falls on empty bunkers. The German main line is intact. Soviet armor and infantry tangle in the Oder flood plain, the ground turned to swamp by German engineers who had released reservoir water upstream days before. For 4 days, the first Belarusian front hammers at the Silo heights. Even here, at the war's final hour, the bill is paid in the usual currency. 30,000 Soviet soldiers die in 4 days. More than American losses on D-Day, in a battle almost no one in the West will remember. To the south, Konev's First Ukrainian Front drives through softer German defenses and sweeps around Berlin's flank. The German position cannot hold. The heights fall. The advance continues. On April 20th, Hitler's birthday, Soviet artillery begins shelling Berlin's city center. By April 27th, the city is encircled. The fighting inside it is block by block, room by room, Rattenkrieg again, with the roles precisely reversed. Hitler youth boys fire anti-tank rockets at Soviet armor from cellars. SS units execute German soldiers caught attempting to surrender. The Reichstag is defended by Latvian and Scandinavian SS volunteers who have nowhere left to go. Before the final assault, Zhukov issues his order to his troops. Remember our brothers and sisters, our mothers and fathers, our wives and children tortured to death by the Germans. We shall exact a brutal revenge for everything. On May 2nd, 1945, General Helmuth Weidling, commander of the Berlin defense area, surrenders to the Soviet officer waiting across the table. Now the identity of that officer can be given. His name is Vasily Chuikov, commander of the Soviet 8th Guards Army. He is the same man who, 2.5 years earlier, held the last strip of ground in Stalingrad with the Volga River at his back and nowhere left to retreat. The man backed against a river with nowhere to go became the man who accepted a capital city's unconditional surrender. The distance from the Volga to Berlin is roughly 1,000 miles. He covered every inch of it. What follows victory is not what victory promises. The Soviet Union loses an estimated 27 million people in the war, soldiers and civilians combined. The scale of that loss will not be fully visible for a generation. Zhukov represents the Soviet Union at Germany's formal surrender on May 8, 1945. He is the most celebrated soldier in his country and perhaps in the world. Within a year, Stalin has stripped him of his commands, erased from official photographs, removed from books, exiled to provincial military posts because his popularity has grown dangerous. The general who accepted Nazi Germany's surrender spends the early Cold War years in obscurity in commands that do not merit the name. Of the 91,000 men who surrendered at Stalingrad, most die in Soviet prison and labor camps. The last of them return home in 1955. There are other names to speak before the end. Tukhachevsky, Triandafilov, Uborovich, the architects of deep battle, shot by Stalin in 1937 and 1938. They never saw what their ideas could do. The army that executed their doctrine, from Stalingrad to Kursk to Bagration to Berlin, did so without them, rebuilding from first principles under fire, paying in catastrophic losses for institutional knowledge that had already been purchased once and then destroyed. The Red Army paid twice for its victory. Once in the blood of the men who built the doctrine, and once in the blood of the men who had to rebuild it while being annihilated. The distance from the Brest-Litovsk border to Berlin is approximately 1,000 miles. The Red Army covered it twice, once east in retreat, once west in advance. The transformation that made the second journey possible was not merely military. It was the industrial relocation of an entire civilization, the rebuilding of a command culture from its foundations, the rediscovery of ideas that should never have been buried, and the suffering of a people on a scale without parallel in the modern world. Whether that makes this a story of triumph or of tragedy may depend on what you think a country owes the people who save it.